There'll usually be a question specifying the setting in your exam. For instance, it'll ask you to write a story in a busy train station. That's where you decide which of your objects and characters you want to bring in. If you are given the setting, think about what senses are going on. This will really help to immerse your reader and it brings your scene to life a lot more. Doing that, it involves a lot of skills covered in the descriptive writing section, so you'll know that when you specify the senses, it really helps to set a mood for your writing. Here's a really good example of that from Margaret Atwood's novel, The Testaments. This part's taken from a scene where a girl realises that her mum's seriously unwell. Her room no longer smelt like her, that light, sweet smell, like the lily-flowered hostas in our garden, but as if a stale, dirtied stranger had crept in and was hiding under the bed. So the smells here are familiar to us. Even if we don't know what hostas are, we generally know what flowers smell like. So the contrast between that familiar, pleasant smell against the stench of that stranger, it's really effective because it emphasises an unwelcome atmosphere of sickness and death. But the smells could also say a lot about the characters. The light, sweet smell, it shows how delicate and feminine the mum is, and the astuteness of the girl to recognise all of that shows how intelligent and sensitive she is. Also, because she knows the smell of her mum so intimately, it also shows how close their relationship must be. Senses can also be a really good start to your story. For example, you could start with, "The smell reminded me of ... So if you start your story like that, it really throws the reader in and it creates some sense of intrigue. You can do that even more so if you add some contrast and juxtapose the sense to the setting. For example, "The smell reminded me of my stepmother smoking at the breakfast table." Firstly, we don't expect someone to be smoking at a breakfast table, especially in front of children, so straight away something feels off here. We start to ask questions. So, is this woman abusive? Was it a very long time ago? We start making some flash assumptions about the characters as well, which may or may not turn out to be true. So we've got this awful stepmother and a poor child that we feel very sorry for, and we haven't even been introduced to them yet. But we're intrigued by them and whatever story is going on between them because of a smell that you wouldn't normally fit with the setting. So in the exam, it might also be the reverse. So you'll get given a sense to write about and the setting is going to be up to you. For instance, the question might be to write a story starting with, "There was complete silence ... Well, where is that silence? That's for you to decide. And here's where it's going to help if you have 5 setting ideas up your sleeve. So mine are a wooded forest, a crowded beach, inside an elevator, a wedding reception, and inside a car. Now, on the surface, it might not look like there can be silence on a busy beach or in a car, but again, that contrast and incongruity makes for a really interesting plot. So perhaps the beach has gone silent because there's an eclipse happening, or the music stopped at a wedding because someone's about to make a very dramatic announcement. It helps if you have 1 or 2 generic spaces, like an elevator or a car, because you can easily adapt those to fit most questions. For example, if I want to make my car silent, then maybe the family's had a huge row and no one's talking to each other. That's then a great way to start the story because, again, the reader's intrigued about what's happened before and what's going to come next. It's generally a good idea to stick to what you know with your settings. So if you've never been to a wedding or a funeral before, it might be worth avoiding those because there's going to be lots of details that you won't know about. Having said that, you might get a question that's set at a wedding. So if you don't like any of the other questions, then you need to practice ways to get around that. So perhaps the wedding takes place on the beach or in your family's garden or one of your other settings that you've prepared. That's going to be a lot easier than trying to describe a church if you've never set foot in one. Enclosed spaces tend to be really fertile ground for creative writing too, because the atmosphere can be quite intense and act like a pressure cooker. Elevators can sometimes be really awkward and painfully silent, so you can use that tension to make up a good story. While we're talking about mood and atmosphere, think about how you want your reader to feel. Remember that all settings and objects have certain connotations, so once you're aware of yours, you can start to manipulate the mood of your scene. So do you want to write something funny or poignant or somber or exciting or perhaps a mix of all of those? Use the connotations of your setting to develop that mood, and then try to use words to create a semantic field to suit the atmosphere. So in Margaret Atwood's example, the semantic field here is of danger and threat, because words like crept and hide and stranger, they're in contrast to the setting of her bedroom, which should be a very familiar and safe space. So it's those contrasting connotations of a bedroom that make it very effective, because a place like a bedroom can be both safe and dangerous, especially if you're really unwell. So you can apply that technique to other settings too. For instance, woods have both a positive and negative connotation. They can be very peaceful, or they can be quite threatening and dangerous. They're also very rich in imagery, so you can describe the way that the light is or the sounds are to allude to either danger or tranquility, or perhaps an eerie mix of both. They also have quite strong biblical and fairy tale allusions, so you can lean on either of those if you want to create a motif. Likewise, islands also have positive and negative connotations. They're tropical and beautiful, but they can also be desolate and life-threatening if you're stranded there. Some settings like these, you can also have a sense of entrapment. Some settings, like woods and islands, can have a sense of entrapment, so they function quite well as a microcosm. Some settings, like woods and islands, can also have a sense of entrapment, which functions quite well. Some settings, like woods and islands, can have a sense of entrapment, so they function quite well as a microcosm. So if you want to get quite political with your characters, then they can represent certain social groups. If you have something to say about race or class or age or gender. So in summary, use your senses to immerse your reader, match your setting to the sense. Also think of ways to contrast your senses with the setting. You'll create a lot more intrigue if the sense is somehow incongruous with the scene. Prepare 5 different setting ideas, just like you've done for your objects and your characters. Keep in mind what mood you want to create and what connotations or semantic field you could build to create the right atmosphere. And lastly, try to stick to what you know. We take for granted all these small details from environments we're really familiar with, so it's those details that make for better writing and higher grades, which is what we want.